Captain Bracken, I'll be briefing you this morning on the execution of mission command principles by Major General Roy Urquhart in Operation Market Garden. In addition to a brief overview of the operation, lessons learned in the present day application. This is informational brief, it's unclassified. So I'd like to start out with a quick clip from A Bridge Too Far, a movie about Operation Market Garden.
We identified 35,000 men 300 miles and dropped them behind enemy lines. It will be the largest airborne operation ever mounted. Quite frankly, this kind of thing's never been attempted before.
Just where is this all going to take place?
Oh, and when? I'm coming to that now. Right. The ground forces. 34, commanded by General Horrocks, 20,000 vehicles, and this is known as the German front line. Now we're going to lay a carpet, as it were, of airborne troops over which 34 can pass. We shall seize the bridges, it's all a question of bridges, with thunderclap surprise, and hold them until they can be secured.
All right. So that was Lieutenant General Browning, the 1st Airborne Corps Commander, explaining to his Airborne Division commanders about Operation Market Garden. So Operation Market was the airborne portion of the operation, where they would land Airborne Division on 3 cities, each holding a pair of bridges, and the 2nd Army would break through the German line, and 30 Corps would follow up the line, crossing the Rhine, over finally Arnhem is the last bridge where the 1st Airborne Division would be, where General Urquhart would be, and then they would have the plains of northern Germany open to them. They could take the Ruhr Valley, the industrial heart of Germany, and end the war by Christmas. And keep in mind this is in Holland, and it's September 1944, so within 100 days they could end the war. That was the plan. So this is General Urquhart. He was newly promoted Major General in the 1st Division Command. No airborne experience. In fact, he was prone to air sickness, ironically. And I believe he executed accepting prudent risk during the planning of the mission. The Royal Air Force would not drop them any closer than 8 miles from Arnhem, which is a very long distance. So he mitigated this risk down to an acceptable level by utilizing a reconnaissance squadron with jeeps mounted with twin machine guns that they would load on the gliders. And they would get there first and hold the bridge until the guys on foot could take the bridge. Additionally, later on in the battle, he utilized an artillery regiment that was 11 miles away to hit targets that were within 100 meters of his front line, which seems extremely risky until you take into account the fact that they were about to be overrun. Then it seems to be a prudent risk to be accepted, which he did, and to great effect and kept them from being overrun. So moving on, this is the Battle of Arnhem, what was supposed to happen. So on day 1, they didn't have enough aircraft for the entire operation, 3 airborne divisions, so they had to drop the 1st Airborne Division over a period of 3 days. So 2 brigades would land first. 1 brigade would secure the LZs and DZs landing zones and drop zones. 2nd brigade would hold the bridge. The next day another brigade would come in and take northern Arnhem, and the next day another brigade would come in and take southern Arnhem. And then sometime that day or the next day, 30 Corps would arrive and relieve them. And presumably General Urquhart would remain in command of the division during this time. So what actually happened is everything started off just fine. And I believe this demonstrates a cohesive team that was built. And what I mean by this is that when they landed, the units operated autonomously. He didn't have to do anything. As soon as they landed, the brigade started securing the drop zones. The brigade moved out to secure the bridge, and they didn't take any they didn't need any further direction. And in fact, in his book, General Urquhart writes, "My immediate concern was to see that everyone was getting on with this allotted task as quickly as possible. I had to deliberately restrain myself from interfering, for the stage was not yet when I could do much to help. At such times, generals are spectators." And that clearly demonstrates that they were cohesive teams that trusted one another. So what actually happened? So like I said, the first 2 brigades hit ground and started immediately executing, which was great. The LZs and DZs were secured. However, the parachute brigade that moved out to take the bridge, 1 battalion made it all the way through unopposed and secured the northern bridgehead. The other 2 battalions and the reconnaissance squadron that was supposed to take the bridge first all got held up by enemy fire and were pinned down, unable to move. Secondly, the communications were completely unreliable. They literally were using courier pigeons to send word back to England. So that means that the generals had no idea what was going on with his brigade. He moved out to find his brigade commanders. The parachute brigade commander, General Lathbury, he was able to meet up with him. He also didn't know what was going on with the battalion, so the two guys moved out to find out what was going on with the battalions. They both got held up in a house where they spent the next 36 hours hiding because there were Germans all over the place. Division commander, 36 hours as the battle commenced away from that division. So I believe this demonstrated a shared understanding, and what I mean is that General Urquhart was gone for 36 hours. As soon as he was gone, his chief of staff knew exactly what he would do for minor decisions, and he took over for that night. And there was a verbal secession plan, so they brought in the next brigade commander to be the acting division commander. He took over immediately, dispatched a battalion to reinforce the bridge, and the brigade that was landing that day decided that one of their battalions would also reinforce the bridge. This was against the original plan, but he understood the plan and the key task of holding the bridge to such an extent where he could make that call. So, this is continuing on with what actually happened. So the 4th Parachute Brigade lands, that battalion moves out to reinforce the bridge. The next day, everything starts to fall apart. The 4th Brigade never makes it to North Arnhem. They get caught up with engagements with the enemy. By the next day, the four different battalions that were supposed to be reaching the bridge never made it. They were practically completely destroyed. The remnants of those battalions started coming back into the division area. The 4th Brigade retreats back down in, and the one battalion that was holding the bridge runs out of ammunition that night. The next day, they were captured. And at this point, basically everyone falls back into the division perimeter, which slowly gets smaller and smaller as they take casualties and are pounded with artillery and mortar fire. Eventually, 34 arrives on 24th, and they make the decision to give up the town and the bridge, and they pull the division out over the river at night on 25th, 9 days after they got there. So, providing clear commander's intent, I believe, was not actually exercised here, and it goes back to very simple thing that everybody generally glosses over, I think, and a lot of op orders is a secession plan. It was verbal, it was sent only to the chief of staff, and it caused great delays in sending those battalions out to the bridge to reinforce. Because the 4th Brigade commander was Brigadier General Hackett. When he landed, he was senior to Brigadier General Higgs, who was ahead of him in the secession plan. Neither of them knew about the secession plan. A lot of arguing, they had to hash out who was what, and what battalions would go with whom, and if the 11th battalion would in fact go to the bridge, which they eventually decided to do anyway, but that delay could have had great effect on the battle. So, how does this have present day application? Accepting prudent risk. I believe that today's leaders can definitely learn from this. If you take a risk and you mitigate it down to an acceptable level, then you can accept the risk and move on. Just the way he did with the fact that they were so far away from the bridge. He put Jeeps on the bridge first. They would get there first. He was able to mitigate that down. Unfortunately, the Jeeps were gliders that tended to crash, and they lost many of the Jeeps and weren't able to do so. The building could, and also knowing when a risk becomes obsolete. A risk is only a risk up to a point, and knowing when that point is, I think, is very important. You don't call an artillery too close to your lines, but when you find out that the artillery is extremely accurate, you're about to be overrun, that risk is no longer valid. Building cohesive teams through mutual trust. You train your soldiers to do the job, so if you train them well enough, then you should be able to trust them to do that job. You don't need to go micromanage them. Create a shared understanding. Cross-training, have your soldiers know each other's jobs. And I was always taught that you should know, your leaders should know 2 up, 1 down. So the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel McKenzie, was able to step in and do his division commander's job overnight. And just like General Hicks was able to step up and do his job when he was actually acting division commander. And provide clear commander's intent. There should be no surprises in the fight. You should have transparency. Transparency builds trust, and trust is vital. And when planning for outcomes, don't just consider the likelihood. It's very unlikely that the first 2, the division commander and General Lafayette, would both be taken out of the fight so soon. So the secession plan was disregarded. The impact of that was huge. So don't disregard something that's unlikely to happen just because it's unlikely to happen when the impact is so great. So here's some numbers for the end of the battle that are pretty astounding. So in conclusion, General Urquhart definitely made some mistakes. It was to his execution mission command prior to the battle and during the battle that led to the division being able to hold on as long as they did, despite poor planning and poor intelligence. They were there for 9 days. Initially, they were told to hold out for 2 days, and then they said 2 to 3 days. The division was there for 9 days, receiving 0 supply drops because they never took the supply zone drop area, and the Air Force dropped all the supplies with the Germans. But despite all that, they were still able to hold on. That concludes my brief. Are there any questions?